Welcome to Indiana Basketball Weekly on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. I'm your host for Indiana Basketball Weekly, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I'd like to welcome in my co-host, Kent Sterling. How you doing, Kent?
Mike, we're 10-1 or 9, or whatever we are. We've got one loss, and so it's a good day, I guess, coming off that win against Nebraska.
Well, could have been worse. Could have been coming off a loss.
You know what? But I question whether that would have been worse. Because maybe these guys think, oh, you know what? We really don't have to show up. We don't need to execute. We don't need to do a whole hell of a lot. If we come out with a win, that's all that matters. And it kind of is all that matters, but you've got to get better. And I see no evidence that they are.
Well, my concern is adjustments because after IU jumped out to an early 13-4 lead, head coach for Nebraska, Fred Hoiberg, made the right adjustments. Indiana never adjusted to them, and Nebraska used what looked like to me a smaller lineup, spread out the IU defense, beat the Hoosiers with cuts and drives to the basket. And on the other end, Nebraska went with what looked like a variety of defensive looks, a lot of zone.
Right.
They forced IU to shoot from the perimeter, and IU was 5 for 25.
You know, and Indiana took the bait. I've seen a lot of people say that over the last 12, 18 hours, whatever, and I believe that that's true. That they said, you know what, let's see if we can get Indiana to try to jack up some shots early in the shot clock, and if they miss, we got a chance. And they did miss, and Nebraska did have a chance, and it took a while for Indiana to adjust. They did once against a 2-3 do exactly the right thing. Trace Jackson-Davis made a great cut to the middle, caught inside, spun, went to the rack. That's how you attack a 2-3 zone. But it seems, and this is across all of college basketball, it's like nobody ever learned that the weakness of the 2-3 is right in the middle. And so pop it into the middle, the thing collapses, and you score easy buckets. They didn't take away the middle, but Indiana they settled offensively again and again and again and making passes that you're like, how does anybody teach a kid to make a pass from one elbow to the opposite block? I've never seen a kid. You don't see fifth graders try to make that pass. It just pisses me off.
Well, no, they can't throw the ball that far, Kent. But when I look at this, it's just a real good thing that Indiana had Trace Jackson-Davis, who basically took over the second half, scored 25 points. Justin Smith, 16 points. Al Durham, 14. Joey Brunk, 8 points in 17 minutes. And my Joey Brunk problem is, outside of 2 minutes in that last game in Madison Square Garden, Joey Brunk just looks like a guy that when we get to playing teams with big men that are physical, he's going to be lost, and this is going to be a huge issue.
And you saw what Nebraska did with Brunk. And when Brunk catches sloppy, right, you hit him with an entry pass, and he catches it with one hand, and it rests on the one hand for a second. And Hoiberg saw that in the film and attacked him from underneath. You got the guy bodying him, and then they'd bring somebody up the baseline to attack that left hand and try to poke a three. And as a result, he had 4 turnovers. And you cannot have a guy in the post turn the ball over 4 times.
Yeah, and Devontae Green played 15 minutes, scored 5 points. So is he being punished? We've never seen Archie do that before, so I'm just asking.
I couldn't tell if he was being punished or whether he maybe tweaked an ankle or something, because there was a point at which that Trace Jackson-Davis and Devontae weren't on the floor, and Indiana literally had no chance to score the basketball.
Yeah, and Al Durham played all right, scored 14 points, but I mean, it's Joey Brunk, 4 turnovers. I just, no blocks, no steals, and I don't know here. Deron Davis played 8 minutes, scored 2 points. I would think this, if you're going in to play a Maryland who's got a big guy, or anybody with a big guy, you need to start getting Deron Davis some minutes unless you just don't have any intention of playing him this year, because I would think in a big situation against a really good physical big man, Deron Davis is your best hope.
He is. He's got the big caboose. He can clear space with it, and he's got nice hands. You know, he can play basketball. My question about Indiana is so much broader than individual guys. It's like no matter who the coach is, and this goes back to the last couple of years under Crean. And then the third year with Archie, these guys, there doesn't seem to be any like intellectual ability to gather the information necessary to play basketball at a high level. They just what Crean was doing was trying to recruit the best talent he could, and then hoping that was enough, hoping he could figure out game to game some kind of strategy to be able to beat opponents. And what works over time, and we see it in Indiana again and again and again with Purdue and Butler, is you've got to establish a culture if you want to win consistently. And I see no culture whatsoever with Indiana. I see nothing that says, here's what we are, here's what we do, here's the hill where we're going to plant our flag and we're going to live or die based upon doing this. There is nothing like that with Indiana basketball, and it drives me crazy.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to recruiting because, once again, I hear other podcasts talk about what great talent this team has. But if you go through this, Justin Smith is great talent, but there's a difference between being a great talent and a great player. And the big thing that makes a great player to me is consistency. Now, I do think Trace Jackson Davis will develop into that. I think Al Durham is a good player. I think Devontae Green is inconsistent. Joey Brunk is limited. Rob Fennessy's limited because he's hurt so much. Armand Franklin's young. Demezy Anderson, Jerome Hunter, Race Thompson. I don't see where this is a great roster, and that's not to defend the way this team plays, because if I would have said this 2 years ago or even last year, it would have been to defend Archie. But we've had 3 years here in this roster outside of Trace Jackson Davis. I mean, how many of these guys could play at Duke or Kentucky?
Well, here, let's ask it this way. How many of the guys at Purdue could play at Duke or Kentucky? Or how many of the guys at Butler could play at Duke or Kentucky?
How about this, though? I bet those guys, they would find a way to put them in the game because of the toughness and the way they play defense and how smart they are.
And you teach guys up. I was talking to LaVale Jordan yesterday, and because I'm over at Hinkle all the time, they're very accessible over there. And what LaVale always says is we are a developmental program. What we do every practice is try to develop these guys, their skill set, their ability to play, and their understanding of the game. And through the course of a season and through the course of their 4-year career, these guys are going to become good basketball players if we do our jobs correctly. I don't see that with Indiana. I don't see them developing guys. I see them becoming stronger. I see them becoming jumpier, perhaps. I see them recruit guys with length. But I don't see guys become better at things as they spend time at Indiana. I just don't see that as being part of the toolbox that these guys utilize to build that program.
So is this fixable this year? I mean,
I don't know whether it's fixable ever. I don't know whether it's fixable ever. You know what I mean? This has been a problem. Other than that team with Hulls at the point and Cody and Vic, now that was a really talented team. They had great talent, to your point, but they also played really hard together. I think they worked hard together. And other than that group, what you've had are some guys who come in and show you flashes, but an inability to kind of mold together and become this coalesced force that goes out and wins basketball games as a unit. You've had guys like Noah Vonleh and Thomas Bryant, and you've had, Troy Williams, that kind of guy come in and then go to the league and play and show that they are good individual basketball players. But I've seen nothing that would suggest that Indiana is capable of being that kind of team that works all pulling on the same end of a rope and figuring it out. And to the point where, and this never happens in the NBA, the Pacers play basketball as a unit at a higher level than Indiana University does, and that's preposterous.
Yeah, and the fact is, since 2000, the best basketball program in Indiana by far has been freaking Butler.
Yeah, right. And you know what? It's interesting you bring up 2000. I do not want to go back to the days of Bob Knight. Bob Knight, there was as much bad as there was good. And we kind of laud Bob Knight at the periodically. End. Right. And where he was kind of full of himself and maybe didn't have the energy to do what was necessary to kind of put the pieces on the floor that were necessary to win a whole bunch of games. But what you had under Knight, at least, was a culture that you could perhaps transfer to somebody who was also a believer in that culture, and then they could move forward with that culture, recruit to it, and coach to it. But you don't have that with Indiana. And that's what I want out of Archie Miller. I want him to say, here's the Indiana way. Here's the way we're going to play basketball. Now I'm going to recruit to this. I'm going to bring these guys in. I'm going to dictate terms to these guys that they play basketball like that, and we're going to see what happens. What's happened to this point, he's recruiting Indiana, and that's a good thing, but I don't see any kind of coalescence among those individual pods of talent that the players represent. I don't see anything that would lead us to believe that they're going to come together and play well together.
Yeah, and I think anybody that thinks that, we're wrong for bashing him, we are in the third year. And
right.
Chris Mack in his second year, they're ranked in the top 5. They made the tournament in his first year. So I still think the problem is when Chris Mack went into Louisville, he got rid of the guys he didn't want and replaced them with guys he wanted. And I still think that it's great to honor the scholarship for the kid, but if the kid don't fit, you got to quit.
Right. That's and that's exactly right. And that's not what's happening. And it's really disappointing. What's disappointing too is that every time I tweet something like that or I say something like that, I get splashback from Indiana fans who are usually in their 20s who think
who don't
that
know any better.
Right. They think that criticism of the program is somehow indicative of a lack of love or a lack of loyalty to the program. And I would argue exactly the opposite.
Yeah, because to me, apathy is when your program is dead. When there's still people like us that care, you're not dead yet. And I still think Archie Miller is a good basketball coach. I've seen him do it before. I don't know what the problem is right now in Indiana. I'm not saying that he can't pull this off. I'm just saying that it's not looking promising right now.
I agree with you that in all likelihood, this is not an Archie Miller problem because this problem continues to exist coach after coach. There's got to be some kind of inertia, some kind of momentum down in Bloomington that is really hard to steer against. And that's, well, I don't think it's Fred. I think that Fred kind of leaves these guys to coach the way they want to coach and hired Archie and said, hey, listen, we hired you because we believe that you're the guy to get this done, so go get it done. I don't know what it is. That's a great question, but I don't believe it's Fred. I do believe it exists, and I don't know what the answer is. I don't think it's changing coaches. I think that one morning Archie Miller is going to wake up and say, you know what, screw this. I'm doing it my way. I'm tired of trying to coach with these kids. I'm going to coach at these kids, and if they don't like it, to hell with them. They can go someplace else and play basketball, but I am not going to preside over this shit show that we continue to trot out week after week after week against lesser opponents, and we're exposed as somehow flawed in a way that shouldn't exist in year 3.
Yeah, right now he's more of a babysitter than he is a coach, from what I see.
Yeah, and everybody's been there. You've been there as a coach, and I've been there as a manager, where you think, okay, is it true? Can we really catch more flies with honey than vinegar? Or do these guys need a big, giant, honking dose of vinegar? And I think at Indiana, they need a lot of vinegar. That these guys, the way they play, it looks like 5 guys who are being coached by 5 different people, kind of regardless of the combination of those people who are on the floor. And again, without Devontae Green and Trace Jackson-Davis on the floor last night, that offense was inert. And defensively, they're just unaware. And I can't believe that Archie Miller doesn't know more about basketball than to allow this to continue or to preside over this and say, you know what, good enough, we beat Nebraska in overtime.
Well, I think this. When you looked at UConn, they played hard. They got the win. UConn is a lot better team than Nebraska. They're a more talented team in Nebraska. The reason this game was so close last night is Fred Hoiberg outcoached him.
Yeah, he did. Schematically, after the first few minutes, they put Indiana in a position where they had a lot of trouble moving the ball, and then they attacked defensively in a way that exposed Indiana as being fundamentally unsound on that end of the floor. Indiana, thankfully, did a great job on the boards. And that goes to Trace Jackson Davis, Justin Smith. Those guys are elite level athletes with elite physical attributes. And I think that Trace is one of those guys who just knows he has a knack for rebounding. And that's a really, really good thing. They also went to the line of Cobb and they missed some foul shots, but they made enough. And that was a good thing. I don't understand. And here's the thing that I didn't understand with Hoiberg. In the last minute, there were probably 50 seconds left, 40 maybe, and Indiana's reeling. They've got the basketball, and Hoiberg has Nebraska foul. And I didn't understand that because they're just coming off a turnover where Demezy Anderson just kind of flings it out of bounds. Thank God he showed up in the overtime. He really started playing hard in the overtime. But he just throws an inbounds pass from underneath, out of bounds, and it looked like Indiana was ready to self-immolate. And then Fred sends Indiana to the line, and why? You know what I mean? What were the odds that Indiana was going to be able to hold on to the ball that entire possession and then get up a quality shot? The odds were like, 1 in 10? But Fred fouls. That made no sense to me. I thought he lost that game with that foul.
Yeah, and I think the other glaring issue is Indiana needs somebody who can knock down a three at some point because the starters were 3 for 12, the backups were 2 for 13, and, I mean, at some point, maybe you just need to stop shooting the damn things and take the ball to the basket.
And finally, they started working it to the post, and that was coming off a timeout, and I think Archie finally was like, okay, what are you doing? I love that you have confidence shooting threes, but please, dear God, somebody make one, or let's just go to the block and let Trace go to work, because Trace obviously was the more talented player, always the most talented player on the floor, and in that matchup, the more talented. And so give it to your talented guy, work the best matchup, and let that man go to work. And finally they did, and it was enough to get them that win. If they lose that game, they're 0-2 in the Big Ten, and you've got a road game to begin like that 18-game run in the Big Ten at Maryland. Good luck with that. If Indiana wants to go to the tournament, they absolutely needed that win last night. And Archie in the post-game press conference is talking about how proud he is of the guys because, man, they had it so tough, where they played the road game at Madison, and then they had to go to New York, and they got home late. But that was 3 days ago.
Yeah, wasn't
what
that
the
Tuesday?
hell is he talking about?
Was it Tuesday that they played?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
right.
what I thought. So you got home Wednesday morning and you had to play more than 48 hours later, and you're under the age of 22.
You know what? I would go out in Bloomington until 3 in the morning. So that's not exactly 4:30 in the morning, but I'm out at Nick's and Kilroy's and the Reg and the Bluebird until 3:30 in the morning. I'd be at class at 8:30 the next day, ready to study, ready to get A's on tests or B's or C's or depending upon the class. I showed up, I showed out, I got the job done, and I did it again and again and again when I was there. And I wish the Indiana guys, how much more exhausting could it be playing a game of basketball than spending a night out in the bars?
Kent, a few shows ago, you explained to us that you took 6 years to get your degree. So, I mean, you had these classes so spread out, Kent, that I don't think it was like a rigorous schedule from what you've told us.
No, that's true. And in my own defense, I did that because I came into journalism as a major late, and you have to take a sequence of classes to move through journalism. You can't hustle through it. So that was the reason for the 6 years. But your point is well made.
Well, I couldn't let it go. You were bragging about it the other day. So I've still just got 14 credit hours total. All right. So we look at what do you know about Notre Dame? I haven't seen them play this year. I saw they got blown out, I think, by North Carolina. The competition hadn't been great. I think they play UCLA today, which they should be safe because, of course, Mick Cronin's coaching, UCLA. So Notre Dame should be all right there. But what's your take on Notre Dame if you've seen them yet?
Well, they're not real talented at this point, and the guys who were talented have cycled out of the program, and so this should be a game that Indiana should plan on winning, but at
we
this
just say
point,
that
I
for
do not
this
feel
game?
good about that.
Yeah, that's what we just said about this game.
Yeah, I don't feel good about. Just like last night, Indiana was an 18-point favorite. And people said, "What are you doing?" I said, I run from that game like it's a building on fire.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not taking 18, or I'm not giving 18 and taking Indiana, and I'm sure as hell not betting against them. But that seems like this. They're going to come up here to Indianapolis, and Notre Dame's going to come down, and either they find a way to get some work done and show up as a competent fundamental basketball team, or Mike Bray is going to kick Indiana's ass.
Yeah, because Mike Bray can coach.
Right. And that's the interesting part, too, of this Crossroads Classic. And I love that event. I love that the four ADs came together and said, let's do this thing, because it's so good for the community and such a great opportunity to see all four of these teams and the coaches. And it's about time that Archie moves up in the pecking order among these guys. I mean, among LaVall Jordan and Matt Painter and Mike Bray, okay.
Archie's fourth.
You can make a good case that he's fourth.
No, you can't make any case that he's not fourth.
Well, LaVall hadn't been there a long time. And LaVall
care.
Didn't go to the NCAA tournament last year either. But and here's the bad thing too, is because there's so much access at Butler. You can talk to any of the players you want one-on-one. You can talk to LaVall Jordan one-on-one. You can talk to him online. You can talk to him offline. Very, very communicative. And Indiana runs, it's like the old Soviet Union. You can't get any information out of that program, and nobody is able to develop any kind of relationship with Archie at all or the players. And I really think that works in Indiana's disfavor.
Oh, I think it definitely
we don't
does.
know what Archie's doing.
Yeah, when you're a new coach, especially, because you want to make everybody love you so they're not writing the crap about you.
Right. And I don't either. He doesn't get that, and granted, I mean, going back to the previous guy, his level of communication with media was annoying and obnoxious as often as not. Just sending texts, either critical of our work or critical of us as human beings. Archie doesn't do that. Archie doesn't care enough about the media, which I don't blame him. Because why? But, with a relationship, at least we would understand, or he would allow us to understand what his end game is and how he sees it operating moving forward. And then we could kind of climb on board and say, okay, this is a long-term rebuild, and he wants to build the culture, maybe. And these guys that he's brought in, Franklin and Jackson Davis this year, and the guys he brought in last year, are a part of kind of that reconfiguration of what Indiana is. But given kind of what he inherited and how those ingredients have sort of become this unruly stew, we don't know what he's trying to do. And that's not a great place for him to be. And it's not a great place, frankly, for us to be.
Yeah, it's not. So what do you think the chances are LaVall Jordan's going to be the new coach at Indiana?
Oh, zero. Zero. Because, I mean, look, if you weren't going to hire Holtman and if you weren't going to hire Stevens, like, you're not going to hire LaVall, right? Why didn't Indiana hire Brad? Why didn't Indiana hire Chris when Chris was available just right up the road? What are you doing? Ohio State, they hire him and they don't miss a beat. They go from Mata to Holtman, and they only enhance their level of play immediately, and it looks like for the long term.
Well,
I don't get it.
I never understood why they didn't go after Chris Mack.
Right, and I'm not sure that they didn't. They may have. There were rumors about conversations.
Yeah, from what I know, and I do know a little bit when it comes to Xavier, he was talked to, but nothing was ever offered to him. And the reason would be because I don't think Chris Mack was that interested, because between me and you,
yeah,
he didn't know what the problem was.
Yeah,
in Indiana, and he didn't want those kind of issues, which is really scary when you consider he went to Louisville and replaced Rick Pitino.
Yeah, right, right, and totally justifiable. I mean, I talk to people all the time, people sort of in the recruiting business and the evaluation business, and they say that, frankly, in their estimation, Indiana isn't a very good job because of the wacko kind of expectations of the fan base, and because of the administration there not being completely behind the basketball program. I don't know whether any of that's true. I do know that our expectations are a little out of whack compared to reality since 2002. But
Well, I think expectations have been out of whack since Bobby Knight got to Indiana.
What do you mean?
I mean, it's just everybody expects to win a national championship every year. Because I remember when you get to 95, 96, 97, Knight was catching a lot of heat, too, for the way those teams were playing.
Yeah, and that was during a period where Indiana was kind of bereft of talent. Like the state just didn't produce as it either did prior to that or since then. And then the decade after, they really, Indiana got good. Not the university, state. Right. I mean, Greg Oden and Mike Conley and Eric Gordon and Etwan Moore, and that 07 class was chock full of great talent. And Indiana got Eric Gordon out of that class for 1 year, and that was it. And nobody, I don't think, from Indiana for the 2006 class. And that was in large part because Mike Davis just didn't value Indiana. And you've got to. I mean, if you want to win a national championship at Indiana, you've got to recruit Indiana well, because if you don't, why is a kid from New York, Massachusetts, or Virginia going to come to Indiana or Cali or Texas or wherever? Why they come to Indiana when kids from Indiana will not?
Yeah, especially when you're Mike Davis question. And nobody knows who the hell you are.
Right, right. And Mike didn't know the coaches and didn't know his way to the high schools. And I mean, there are so many stories about the malfeasance within the recruiting of that
it's
program.
It's not Mike Davis's fault. It was Indiana's administration fault for putting him in that position.
Right, exactly.
Because you're Mike Davis, you're not turning down $1 million contract.
And this is another thing where I don't think it's Fred necessarily, because the women's basketball team has developed and is now on the precipice of being a top 10 team. Soccer has always been a national power, continues to be a national power. Swimming is unbelievable. Track's been good.
Well, let me ask you this. Is it because the administration is afraid that they're going to get a coach that, you know what I mean? I mean, the coach was bigger than the school president at that point. And let's face it, if Archie Miller was to win a couple national championships, he would be too.
Yeah, and that I think that even though the entire administration and all the board of trustees, I believe, have flipped since 2002, so nobody was there when Knight was there, and nobody can, from a first-person perspective, kind of explain the hell that was Indiana basketball, for the last probably 15 years, going back to probably the time that he had that little dalliance with New Mexico, only to shut Tom Ehrlich up when he was the president of the university. From that point on, Knight was completely uncontrollable, and Indiana became what it became, and there was no kind of there was no oversight really for Bob Knight, and that was the shame of the thing. But this, we're so far away from Indiana even being in contention for a national championship. I don't see how you get there from here. I get your point, and it's a perfectly valid one.
Yeah, because I think even if those guys aren't there, they've heard the stories.
Yeah.
And if you're a school president, you don't want some basketball coach being bigger than you.
Right. And you also, there's a school of thought that I don't subscribe to, but it's a school of thought that if the basketball team is the dominant athletic force on your campus, then the football team, this is specific to Indiana, then the football team cannot be. And I don't subscribe to that, but you hear people who are at different levels of leadership within Indiana's athletic department saying that kind of thing. And that becomes troubling.
Well, I tell them this, but even with an 8-win season, they still got 15, 20,000 empty seats almost every game.
Yeah, right. And Assembly Hall, even though Indiana is mediocre, you know what? The lower bowl, at least, I don't know what the balcony was last night, but for that game against Nebraska, there everybody is. And, they're as rabid as ever. And here we are talking about it on a Saturday afternoon. And this is what, if I'm not talking to you about it, I'm talking to somebody else about it. And that's because Indiana basketball is what it is. They just got to figure out how to start playing like a unit. And I don't know how you get there from here.
Well, I think Archie just needs to wake up and coach him. I mean, that's it, basically, because really, I've watched him in Dayton, which is not that far from me.
Yeah.
And he can coach. I know he can coach, and that's what drives me nuts, because I see these people that are like, oh, he doesn't know how to coach the kind of talent he's got. Hell, the last Dayton team he had that went to the Elite Eight had more talent than this Indiana team.
Yeah, I completely think that that's nutty. I don't think the level of look at the way Kentucky plays. Like, Kentucky's always talented. Kentucky plays better as a unit, even though they're cobbled together year to year, than Indiana is right now. And a lot of these guys have been there. You've got 2 seniors, you got 2 or 3 juniors. These guys have been together a little bit. They ought to be better at fundamentally executing basketball plays than they are. And that's the shame of the thing.
All right, Mike. I just called you Mike because somebody calling me right now. His name is Mike. All right. Mike Sterling. Actually, that sounds better, don't you think, Mike? Mike's probably the best name there is out there. All right. Do we want to do a preview show during the week for Notre Dame, or do we just want to wait till after the Notre Dame?
Sure.
All right. What day is good for you?
How about, the game's on Saturday, so we could do it any day next week. I mean, the later in the week, probably the more relevant.
Yeah. Well, what about Thursday?
Sure.
All right, guys. We will be back Thursday at 2 o'clock. All right, Kent?
Yep. Perfect.
See, everybody knows that we're prepared when we do this show, because they can hear our preparation for the next show. All right, guys. We're going to wrap it up for today. We will be back Thursday at 2 o'clock Eastern Time on the Indiana Basketball Weekly Show. You can find Kent Sterling everywhere. But, Kent, go ahead and reiterate it to him.
At Kent Sterling on Twitter. You can follow me on Facebook at Kent said, there I am, Kent Sterling, KentSterling.com. And I wrote a book that you can get on Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. Just search Oops. That's the name of the book. And Kent or Sterling or both. And order you a copy for Christmas. It'll be there by Christmas Day.
Is that the story of Mike Davis coaching in Indiana? Oops.
Yeah, I could have written that book too.
All right, we're going to have to get you on to do an interview about your book.
Let's go.
Because I've read 3 books this week from people that sent me books that wanted me to interview them. They were all pretty good books, though, so that makes it all right. Sometimes, I'll read like 5 pages, and then I'll just BS my way through the interview. But this week, all of them were good.
This is 37 chapters, all about me screwing something up and what I learned from the screw-ups and how we shouldn't be afraid of mistakes. We ought to embrace them because they allow us to deal with a little adversity and move forward.
Well, we all know no matter how good we are, we screw up more than we succeed in life.
And thank God. But we should forgive ourselves and forgive each other little, screw-ups and move forward and understand that that's the good stuff.
All right. So I feel much better now that you've forgiven me for calling you Mike on air. That'll be chapter 19 of my book. All right, guys. Remember to go to KentSterling.com for all things Kent Sterling all the time. You can go to The Grueling Truth, at Grueling Truth on Twitter, or to GruelingTruth.com. You can hear all of our shows on almost any podcasting platform you can find, including iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you want to find podcasts. You'll find The Grueling Truth. So for Kent Sterling, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.